From Apuant Productions and WUWM, this is Classic Eats. I'm Kyle Johnson Cherek. For this episode, I sit down with Robert Simonson. He is a cocktail expert for the New York Times, twice nominated for the James Beard Award. He has written 5 books and is a contributor to publications such as Food and Wine, Bon Appetit, and others. How did the old-fashioned cocktail come into being? Its storied history dates back nearly as far as the origins of the cocktail itself. Its spirits, muddled fruit, and the end of all cocktail hearsay, today on Classic Eats. But first, a story. It's 1862 and you stand behind the mahogany bar at the Metropolitan Hotel in New York, your diamond-studded rings catching the gaslight as you reach for a bottle of cognac that arrived just yesterday from Bordeaux via newly expanded rail lines. Though the patrons know you as the professor, your birth certificate reads Jerry Thomas, and what you're about to pour into that silver shaker isn't just a drink. It's the very essence of this new America rising up around you like the ever-present steam of the ever-expanding rail lines. 20 years ago, the wealthy of New York drank what their grandfathers drank. Brandy, rum, whiskey, neat. But you, having worked the gambling halls of San Francisco during the gold rush, having tended bar in St. Louis as the railways pushed westward, you know something fundamental has changed. The Transcontinental Railroad, completed just 7 years hence, is already reshaping how tastes evolve. It brings you everything. Lemons from California, and their journey from grove to glass is now measured in days rather than weeks. Italian vermouth, Jamaican rum, French, absinthe, all racing inland on iron rails, transforming what's possible behind your bar. You remember when a fancy drink meant adding sugar to whiskey. Now your imagination and showmanship burgeons amidst bottles from every corner of the world. The explosion of wealth in post-Civil War America has created newly minted millionaires desperate to prove they've arrived. By mid-century, America only had 19 of them, but by the time the 19th century turned to the 20th, there will be 4,000. They come to your bar at the Metropolitan, and later at the Occidental in San Francisco, where you'll command the unheard sum of $100 per week because you offer them sophistication in a glass. When you flame brandy over a blue blazer, arcing the burning spirit between 2 silver mugs and a cascade of blue fire, you're transforming raw American wealth into European refinement, pioneer brashness into cosmopolitan elegance. But what truly sets you apart is the book you published this year, How to Mix Drinks, or the Bon Vivant's Companion, the first bartending guide ever printed in America. You've done something uniquely American. You've democratized luxury. You've taken the secret knowledge of the bar, ratios and techniques passed down through whispered apprenticeship, and written them down for anyone with ambition to learn. Just as the railroad has made distant luxuries accessible, your book makes the craft of the luxury bartender available to anyone with steady hands and your guiding text. Your recipes read like a manifesto of America's new reach. The mint julep now served in silver cups at northern establishments. The Tom Collins made possible by California citrus and reliable ice production. Each drink is a small map and testament of how railroad and steamship have shrunk the world to fit behind your bar. How could you know, Professor, that your book would never go out of print? That bartenders a century and a half later would still study the recipes, still invoke your name as the father of American mixology? The Gilded Age would pass, the fortunes of your patrons would rise and fall, their grand hotels demolished. But the cocktail culture you helped birth, The idea that a drink could be art and that American hospitality could rival anything Europe offered, that would persist. Long after the last spike was driven into the railroad connecting the coasts, or the last steamship's well-to-do passengers disembarked, the cocktail culture you helped birth, and the idea that a drink could be art, that a bartender could be an artist, that American hospitality could rival anything Europe could offer, that would persist. Bartenders would still reach for your book, a perfect mix of American ambition, innovation, and the democratization of luxury via the cocktail, Gilded Age or not. Welcome to Classic Eats. I'm Kyle Johnson Cherek. This is a show about culinary history, why we eat what we eat, the people, the places, the scenes and situations that set the course for the way we dine. Each show, we pick a thing, a person, a drink, a movement, or an object that made its mark on what we call food. For this episode with Robert Simonson, cocktail expert, we discuss the history and the lore of the classic cocktail, the old-fashioned. Can you give me, and go on, drink historian, as much as you want, the history of the old-fashioned and then how it migrated into Wisconsin? Because if I understand, our cocktail, the old-fashioned, is a verisimilitude of the original, but not quite the same.
That's right. Wisconsin's version of the old-fashioned is quite different from the standard old-fashioned, also the historical old-fashioned. So the old-fashioned is basically the original cocktail. Cocktail was defined in a newspaper in 1806 as having spirits, water, sugar, and bitters. So that was a cocktail. Today we call every mixed drink a cocktail, but back then it was a very specific drink.
I thought that the Sazerac was the first cocktail, but you're saying the old-fashioned was?
Yeah, there's a consistent myth that the Sazerac was the original cocktail, but actually the Sazerac wasn't invented until 1899, and cocktails had existed for a century prior to that. So the cocktail is spirit, water, sugar, and bitters. So if you put whiskey in there, you get a whiskey cocktail. And for the longest time, that's what the old-fashioned was. It was just called a whiskey cocktail. And then around in the 1870s, enterprising bartenders decided they were going to improve on the cocktail, and they started adding things like curacao or chartreuse or maraschino liqueur, and they'd call these improved whiskey cocktails.
And were those things just currently available? Previously, they had not been available to
That's
the enterprising cocktailers? Yeah, cocktail mixers?
Yeah, because new ingredients arrived to the United States from Europe, and so bartenders played with them.
Right.
Now, there were always some cranky old-timers who didn't like these improvements, so-called, and so they got in the habit of saying, I want an old-fashioned whiskey cocktail.
Oh, there it is.
That told the bartender that they just wanted it the regular way with just the whiskey. And so over time, and it took decades for this to happen, old-fashioned whiskey cocktail got abbreviated to old-fashioned.
Fascinating. First, I adore, as a food historian myself, the etymology of anything, where it began, the culinary etymology. Were the whiskeys that the bartenders were pouring then, did we have name brand whiskeys, or was it just whiskey out of a barrel essentially and mixing it with sugar, water, and bitters?
Yes, that's right. There weren't that people weren't calling out for brands. That didn't happen until the 20th century. They would have, a jug or a demijohn or a barrel of whiskey. It would be bourbon or rye, typically. If you were in a cocktail bar in the 1870s up until Prohibition, you were expected to know hundreds of different cocktails. There were many more cocktails that were being called for by your average citizen.
Yeah. Can you paint me a visual picture of what one of those bars would look like as compared to today's bar?
Sure. They were rather on the grand side. Cocktails were mainly consumed by the upper classes. If you were the working class or blue collar, you were drinking beer or ale or things like that, or
Mm-hmm.
just straight spirits. If you wanted cocktails, mixed drinks, you were going to a fancy hotel bar or kind of a grandly appointed bar with, with dark wood and a beautiful mirror behind the bar. And the bartenders would be in vests and they'd be wearing diamond rings and have, beautiful waxed mustaches and that kind of thing. And so I'm trying to think of, I mean, a lot of these bars have disappeared. There are some of them here still in New York and maybe
Right.
Chicago. Um, but that's what they would have looked like. And the patrons would have been well dressed as well.
If you're just joining us, I'm sitting down with cocktail expert Robert Simonson as we plunge the depths of the myths and lore of the old-fashioned cocktail. So back to the old-fashioned. So we've got the etymology of the old-fashioned, the old-timers that grew up drinking just whiskey in their sugar water and bitters. And now we've got, I guess, the new wave. This is the 1870s of bartenders that are mixing in other things. Is there was there a trend towards one thing or another, or was it sort of a competition of what the next whiskey fashioned? Was that what people called it then?
Uh, well, there was a period of time where there are many different kinds of old fashions. So if you picked up a cocktail book in the 1880s, it would have a few recipes. Whether you wanted it one way or another, and so that you could satisfy all the customers, all the patrons. And toward the end, toward Prohibition, it started to get a little more ornate, a little fruity. They started piling fruit on top, sometimes things like pineapple, along with the usual cherry and orange. And then everything kind of came to a halt in 1920. The cocktails leading up till Prohibition, the bartenders were very inventive and decorative, and they would pile garnishes high on top of certain cocktails. And those included cherries. They were maraschino cherries. Back then, they were real cherries. And a lot of people think that the cherries in the old fashions became more prominent after Prohibition because they were used during Prohibition to mask the taste of bad liquor.
Oh, that's really interesting. So the bathtub gin, writ large per se, the cherries were
Right,
masking.
and terrible whiskey, poorly aged whiskey, or maybe illegally adulterated whiskey. You put enough oranges and cherries in there, you're not going to taste it, and you're still going to get a buzz off it.
So it's basically a brutal sangria, a really awful sangria.
That's one way of looking at it.
Minus the wine. Yeah.
And then once we got at the other side of Prohibition, we just stuck with the fruit.
Is that so? A Wisconsin old fashioned, when you go to a Wisconsin supper club, which I trust you have been to many times, I'm sure.
Yes.
You order an old fashioned, and it really doesn't matter, even if you're going to just a standard restaurant, and you order an old fashioned, it's going to come with a pretty good modicum of fruit on it. That's just understood. Whereas with other drinks, people might order and they'll say a Manhattan, I want 3 blue cheese olives, or I don't want the blue, what have you, that sort of thing. But when did we here in Wisconsin start piling it on like that, and why have we gripped? I mean, it's if you sent an old fashioned out in Wisconsin at a supper club today, and it was minus the fruit, the customer would send it back.
Yes. I think there are many ways to serve a brandy old fashioned. In many ways, everyone knows that when you order a martini, that leads to a conversation between you and the bartender. Lots of questions. Gin or vodka, up or on the rocks, olives or twist. The brandy old fashioned's like that as well. I mean, you order an old fashioned in Wisconsin, they're going to assume you want brandy, but they may ask you brandy or whiskey. And then they're going to ask you if you want it sour, sweet, or press, which has to do with the kind of soda that's on top of it. And they're going to ask you what kind of garnish. The cocktail always starts with a muddled orange and cherry. But as far as the garnish that goes on top at the end, that could be more orange and cherry, or it could be pickled mushrooms, it could be olives, or it could be pickled Brussels sprouts.
Okay, so back to so we're at post-Prohibition. We're
Yes,
done with the bathtub gin whiskeys. We've got fruit on top of the old fashioned, but it's still for the whole country a whiskey old fashioned, correct? But do we have in
that's right.
Wisconsin? Have we shifted over to when did the brandy come in, and then go along with your timeline?
Yes. So how brandy became the choice, the liquor of choice for old fashions in Wisconsin, is very complicated, and also there's some disagreement. For the longest time, there was this accepted theory,
Mm-hmm.
which was put forth by a Madison paper called the Isthmus, and it had to do with the Columbian Exhibition in
Right.
Chicago in
That's the one that I've
1893.
heard. Yeah, that
Yeah,
theory. Yeah,
that
and
was at that exhibition, the Corbell brothers from California came out and they exhibited their new brandy for the first time.
mm-hmm.
So it stands to reason that a lot of people from Wisconsin went down to the Columbian exhibition. They tasted the brandy, they liked the brandy, and they started drinking it.
And at that
So,
point in history, we had more Germans in Wisconsin than anywhere else other than Germany, and they loved their brandy wine. So you could
yes.
kind of make that link. Yeah,
Yeah, the Germans brought over their love for brandy even before that. They not
right.
only drank brandy, but many of them made their own brandy,
Yeah, yeah.
in their homes. So there was that taste for it already. But recently, there's been some new scholarship that poked some holes in it. Pointed out that Corbel didn't actually make brandy for about 30 years, from the 30s to the 60s. So that didn't that theory doesn't work anymore.
Right.
And so a new theory is that after World War II, this is when the thirst for brandy really took hold. It's because there wasn't a lot of good whiskey to be had. The distilleries were shut down during World War II, and they were used in the service of war goods. And
Right.
all the grain went to the troops, and they were making industrial alcohol. So after the war, there wasn't a whole lot of good whiskey. Some distributors in Wisconsin found out the Christian brothers in California were sitting on gallons and gallons of well-aged brandy. And so they purchased a bunch of it and they brought it out here, and they gave Wisconsinites the chance to taste brandy, to drink good brandy as opposed to drink bad whiskey. And they
Mm.
chose good brandy.
You're listening to Classic Eats with the history of the old fashioned cocktail and cocktail expert Robert Simonson.
I had assumed for a long time that Wisconsinites had been drinking brandy old fashions for a century.
Mm-hmm. So did
But
I. Yeah. Yeah.
when I started looking in old newspapers, if you look at old menus from the 30s, 40s, 50s from Wisconsin, and it says old fashioned, it's a whiskey old fashioned. You can't find a brandy old fashioned. They don't start
Interesting.
showing up until the 1960s. And I think what we have here is a story of good old American capitalism. The
Mm-hmm.
distributors and the brandy makers and the advertisers all got together. Starting in the 60s, you saw California brandy advertised heavily in Wisconsin newspapers. It
Yeah.
was a concerted effort, and it worked.
The 60s really being the boom time for the Wisconsin Supper Club. We'd won the war, the leisure class was in full swing, and we had this is all my conjecture, we had an expanding middle class and even upper middle class. So people wanted to celebrate and recreate and belong. And the Supper Club has got great membership dues, which is basically a parking spot and the ability to dress up and grab a seat.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
yeah, pretty low bar. Uh,
right.
yeah. So how does it that? But there are many things in drinking history and states history that are a time and a place, but that don't endure. Yet the old fashioned, supper clubs, we don't have nearly as many as we once did, for instance. But the old fashioned is a drink that, um, I mean, this is your expertise, but I would say maybe anywhere above a dive bar, the bartender may regularly make for people. In
Yes.
Wisconsin, would you agree with that?
Yeah, you can go into almost any bar in Wisconsin and get one. It kind of reminds me of the Sazerac that you mentioned in New Orleans. You can go
Mm-hmm.
into any bar in New Orleans and get a Sazerac. That's not necessarily the case in any other city. I think this is one of the reasons brandy old fashions have such a strong foothold in supper clubs. It's because they're that rare cocktail that pairs well with eating. If you
Mm.
get a standard old fashioned, you're basically talking 2 ounces of barely adulterated whiskey, and that's a very strong drink.
Yeah.
The brandy old fashioned with all the ice and the muddled fruit and the 7 Up or whatever you have on top is a weak drink. It is
Hmm.
not a powerful drink. So you can drink 3 or 4 of these throughout a dinner and you're just fine. And
That's a
that's why they work so well in a supper club.
So when
Yeah.
you
So,
come back to Wisconsin, if you do, I know you
mhm.
have, but if you do, where do you like to get an old fashioned?
Yeah, I usually get to Wisconsin at least twice a year. I still have relatives there, and I always
Hmm.
make a point of going to a supper club every time I come. I like to get a brandy old fashioned in a supper club.
And how do you order it?
Um, I the most common brandy old fashioned order is brandy old fashioned sweet, which
Hmm.
means it's going to be topped with 7 Up or Sprite or something like that. I like to be a little more contrary, and I do the brandy old fashioned sour, which means it's going to be topped with squirt soda. That's a grapefruit soda,
Hmm.
and that's generally how I do it. I just go right up to the bar and I say brandy old fashioned sour. Usually, there's no more discussion. They'll probably ask me if I want any further garnish on top, and I'll say just more orange and cherry. I've tried olives and Brussels sprouts and mushrooms. It's an interesting idea, but I do not like it.
Explain the press to me because I've never understood that. I don't judge it, but I'm with you. I'm a sour.
Press is, I think, less ordered. It's a combination of a little bit of 7 Up and a little bit of soda water. So on paper, it's slightly weaker than the other ones.
Hmm.
And there are two explanations for the name. It could be that there was a button on the soda gun that said soda water, so you press it and you make a press. A more colorful explanation is it's short for Presbyterian, and this was the preferred version by Presbyterians who apparently are a little more abstemious, don't want as powerful a drink. I don't think that one's true, but it's fun. It's bewildering to non-Wisconsinites, all this terminology. There's a glossary that goes
Right.
along with the drink.
Well, I adore it, and every state has got a version of this in regards to a fish fry, or in this case, the old fashioned. It's a
Hmm.
it's an inside cultural talk. And once you're
Yeah.
part of it, you're part of a tribe. And as you come into it, if you don't quite know, it can be a little disorientating, but we're very warm people, so we'll bring you in.
Maybe
Yeah.
it's because I grew up in Wisconsin, but I've always been attracted to places, states, and cities that have a strong regional food and drink tradition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I adore all the documentation you've done on it, and your work in the Times and your books on my shelves, some of the more cherished. And
Well,
thanks for
thank you.
spending time with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me.
That's our show. Know that when you order an old fashioned, you're taking a sip of history. Thanks for leaning your elbow on the bar of this episode of Classic Eats.
Classic Eats is created and hosted by Kyle Johnson Cherek
and co-produced by Aplant Productions and WUWM.
Executive producers Kyle Johnson Cherek and Rob Schoonover.
Audio editing and engineering by Brian Arkta and John Rymaszewski.
You can hear this episode again and any others you've missed when you subscribe to Classic Eats, found wherever you listen to your podcasts.